G'day guys, today I'm going to be talking to Evie Hantzopoulos. She's running for Council District 22, which covers Astoria and parts of East Elmhurst that is currently represented by Council Member Costa Constantinides. Evie, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So tell us about yourself. Why are you running for office? What is your background and what brings you here?
Sure. So I am the daughter of immigrants. My family came to this country with fourth and fifth grade educations and settled in Massachusetts, and that's where I grew up. My dad was a cabinet maker, my mom was a garment worker, and also worked as a bagger in the supermarket. And I was the first in my family to graduate from high school and go on to college. I moved to New York City back in 1990 for graduate school, and originally lived in Brooklyn, moved to Astoria in 1999, where I have lived ever since. I really love this community. It's a place that I think so many people are attracted to because of its diversity, because it has been a traditionally affordable place to live, a wonderful community. So I've really been happy to build a life here and want to see other people have that same opportunity. A little bit more about myself. I'm currently the executive director of a nonprofit called Global Kids, and our mission is really to develop community leaders, global citizens, and human rights activists. And I've been doing that for 24 years. I've been executive director for 10 years. Prior to that, I worked in the South Bronx. I taught drama in schools on social justice issues. So I am a lifelong educator. I've been, very involved here in the community, which I can talk more about later. But I'm the mom of 3 kids who've all attended public schools, and just absolutely love this district, love this community. And I'm running because I really believe that, we're at a very critical point in our society. We have obviously seen and exposed so much injustice. We all knew that it was there, but really it's at a point now where we can't ignore it because of COVID, because of the murders of George Floyd and so many others, because there is such an income inequity and other forms of inequity in our city and in our country. So after kind of, working in nonprofit with young people, which I truly, truly love, I feel that it's time for me to, take my action on a different level. So really look at how I can be part of rebuilding the city in a more just and equitable way post-COVID, and also making change on the citywide level as well as the local level right here in the district.
Okay, Evie. Now you're very active in the neighbourhood. I've seen you on Community Board 1. Could you just sort of tell us about your involvement with Community Board 1 and other things that you're doing in the area?
Sure. So I was appointed to the community board in 2010. I had been doing a lot of grassroots work with my neighbors and in the community around public health issues and a number of other issues. So I was happy to be appointed in 2010. A couple of years ago, I was appointed as chair of the Housing Committee, and I also serve on the Zoning Committee. I feel like I have really been active in bringing some of these housing issues and how they're tied to land use and zoning to the community board, and really pushing for, I think, more robust discussion on rezonings and what those mean, how they displace people, how it leads to gentrification, and how some of these really large-scale developments will greatly shift, the fabric of our community and destroy it in many ways. So my work on the community board, I think, is to call for more transparency, which I have done along with several other community board members, and to really look at how to be more critical and really ask the difficult questions that we need to do around development, and what does that mean, and how is it done, and how can we change it. So that's what I've been doing on Community Board 1. In terms of my other involvement within, District 22, I have, through my organization, Global Kids, we have worked at several schools within the district over the years, working with young people to empower them to take action on issues that they care about, and also helping prepare them for college and exposing them to opportunities. I also, during COVID, co-founded Queens Feeds Hospitals, which is now called Frontline Foods Queens, which raises money. We're still going, raises money to pay restaurants to make meals, at first for healthcare workers during the height of COVID, and now for the nitric community, for nursing homes, and for food pantries. So I'm very proud to have been part of that effort, which formed, right in March right as COVID was unfolding with a bunch of strangers. There's about 6 of us who came together to put that together. I'm also one of the lead organizers on the organizing team for the Astoria Mutual Aid Network. Again, going back to March, doing work to facilitate neighbors helping neighbors so that their critical needs get met. I helped spearhead the 31st Avenue Open Street with some of my community members, so that more people in the neighborhood could have some open space to socially distance, to gather, to convene, to do all sorts of things. I'm also very happy with that effort as well. I mean, those are just some of the things.
Oh, man, that's a pretty comprehensive list, and I have heard your involvement in some of these groups. So that's quite something. You did touch on something a few moments ago, and that was land use. Could we? And you're involved with that in CB1. Can you give me some examples of some rezonings that have taken place in recent years that you thought worked out well, some that you didn't think worked out, some that you thought didn't work out very well for the public? If you could just sort of weigh in on that a little bit.
Sure. I think there have been some rezonings that I have been fully in support of, and I can give you a few examples, because these rezonings were really about meeting the community's needs, particularly the people who are most vulnerable, the people who most need affordable housing. So there's 2 senior housing developments that are in the works. One of them, I think they just broke ground recently, and that is being developed through Catholic Charities. So it's a nonprofit that's doing the development. It's going to be the Bishop Valero residence, I believe, and will bring over 100 apartments for lower income seniors, with 30% of those apartments going to seniors who were formerly homeless. So something like that, whether it's a variance or a rezoning, I will fully support. And it's being developed by a nonprofit. So again, it's not being created to make money. It's being created for a mission to serve a community. There's also in development right now a project to see the municipal lot that is on 31st Street and Broadway be converted to rezoned for, housing for lower income seniors. Again, this is a huge need in District 22. There's a huge waiting list, which our current City Council member, Costa Constantinides, has talked about. So we really need to make sure that our seniors have adequate housing. So I fully support that. That's a rezoning that I think is important and, again, meets a need. And the third would be the LA Forney Center had come to the community board to ask for a variance. It wasn't a rezoning, but a variance so that they could build supportive housing for LGBTQ youth who are homeless. And so, given that roughly 40% of the youth homeless population are LGBTQ, this was something that was really needed in the community. And so I fully supported that. So those are like 3 examples, I think, of, rezonings or variances that I was totally in support of. They had nonprofit developers. They were really meeting a need in the community. And so, why wouldn't we want to see that? Those are the kinds of things that we want to rezone for. Projects that I don't feel worked out well. I mean, right now we're seeing on Hallett's Cove, with both the Hallett's Cove project and the Astoria Cove project, I think where we were giving so much to the developers and we're getting very little. Sorry?
I thought that project might come up.
Yeah. And then, there's also, it's just outside the district, but certainly of concern to those of us who live within District 22 and in Astoria, is the Innovation Queens project that's being proposed by Larry Silverstein. He's worth $4 billion and wants to build over 2,000 units of luxury housing. And most likely there will be subsidies that we as taxpayers are contributing to that. And I just think that, that's wrong. What we need is truly affordable housing at levels that are going to serve the people who live here or people that want to come and live here who don't have $4,000 a month to spend on rent. So we really need to reevaluate some of these proposals and also just how the land use process works. Because right now it is very developer driven and we need to make it more community driven.
Right, okay. A big issue in the City Council this year has been police reform and the funding of the NYPD. What was your take on the budget negotiations and how the budget was reduced, arguably, by a sum. Some say $1 billion, some say very little. But what was your take on that budget vote, and how would you look at the NYPD?
Well, I fully support defunding the NYPD, a $6 billion budget. We have so many other needs here. And we've also seen how, communities have been targeted by the police, our Black and brown communities, and how that has led to, some very distressing things happening to those communities year after year after year. I fully support defunding the NYPD. I did not support the way the NYPD was supposedly defunded this last budget round, because I think what we saw was that very, very little actually has been cut from the budget. And it's kind of been this like shell game, and I don't think that that's good. And I think transparency in the budget making negotiation process is something that we have to look at and push for kind of going forward, because it's too easy to say we're defunding the NYPD by $1 billion. And then when you really look at it, you look at the numbers and the analysis gets done after, you see how meaningless it actually was. So I feel like, I didn't support, I support defunding the NYPD. I don't think that really happened. So, moving forward, I think there needs to be, more proactive and pushing for what it is that we'd actually like to see defunding, and can't just be a hashtag, right? We have to have kind of concrete ideas for what that is, and then really hold our city council members accountable for doing that, because defunding the NYPD is the best way to reduce violence against Black and brown communities, because they're the ones who are most targeted. They're the ones, where we're still seeing stop and frisk, even though it's, illegal. And here, the 114th precinct had the highest stop and frisk rates back in February. So I think more needs to be done, and particularly given that we're going to be facing a budget crisis, where we allocate our limited resources is going to be key to making sure that we have an equitable and just city.
Okay. Now, there's a progressive wave going across New York City, and really, it's very strong here in Astoria. See in the Assembly, Congress, etc. How will you differentiate yourself from other progressive candidates? And there are likely to be several. So how are you going to position yourself?
Yeah, I think that that's a great question. And I'm happy to see so many progressive candidates running for city council, because the need to address underlying equity and injustice is really important, right? And that has to be at the forefront moving forward in terms of how we budget and how we legislate. So there's lots of great candidates, some high profile candidates and people of a mix of, backgrounds and expertise. I think for me, there really does need to be transformative change on a higher level, obviously within not just our city or our district, but in our country. But also, I think in terms of what makes me different is that I have a lot of on-the-ground experience making this happen over the last several decades. I'm one of the older candidates, I'll have to say that. And so, I have these ideas for what it is that we need to do in our city to build kind of communities of care, to make sure that there is budget justice, to make sure that we are creating spaces that everyone can benefit from, that we're rethinking our streets, we're rethinking our education and how we create systems that are more equitable. So I kind of have all those visions, and you can see those if you go to my website, because I'm very, very detailed in terms of what I spell out. But then also on the ground, I've been working with people over the years on a whole host of things in terms of getting things done. So whether it is saying, yes, we need more open space for people, we need more public spaces, we need to kind of reclaim our streets. So then work with my neighbors to get an open street, created here right in Astoria. If we're seeing that our small businesses are struggling during COVID, I mobilized with my neighbors and just people all across the district to say, how do we support our restaurants? And so I helped create, Queens Feeds Hospitals, Frontline Foods Queens with.
So you're basically saying you've got the top-down vision, but you've also worked from the ground up. So you sort of have that as something you're going to make clear to constituents out there.
And
Yeah.
And I think that that's important because this is the city council position, right? So you really do need to have both, right? So it's really looking at understanding what the needs are of the community. And because I've lived here for 21 years, and I've raised 3 kids who've all gone to public schools, and I have worked with all sorts of people, I feel like I do have that on the ground experience, which I think is important, as well as kind of the ideas and vision to really help transform our city and make sure that our city, as well as our district, is really providing everyone with what they need to be able to live in dignity and have a good life.
Okay, great. Now, you said your children went, or maybe they still do, go to public schools. What do you think can be done to potentially bring more schools to the district or improve the existing schools we have?
So in this district, we are the second most crowded district in Queens. So overcrowded schools is definitely a problem. We also have some schools that are highly segregated. And we also, need to find ways to create more schools so that we alleviate class size. So in terms of how do we bring more schools to the district, I think we really need to look at what are those areas where there is high overcrowding. How do we purchase as a city or lease or do whatever it is to get the properties that we need to build those schools? And how do we also make sure that we are getting our fair share? As you probably know, New York City, won a case, the Campaign for Fiscal Equity, to ensure that we were going to get the proper funding to fund our schools. And that still has not happened on the state level. So I feel that, we have to work towards that. We have to push a little harder, to really ensure that the state is doing what they need to do, that our governor is fully funding our schools, because that will influence, obviously, how our schools function, the quality education that people get. But then also in the city, we do need to prioritize education more. We saw education cuts, this past budget. We need to make sure that we have the funding that we need to build schools. And that also that when we do build these schools, that we are zoning them in a way that is equitable and where Black and Brown communities aren't shut out of some of these newer schools that are being built. And that has happened in District 30. And I think moving forward, we need to really evaluate how zoning, school zoning, school district zoning is done in this district so that we don't have segregated schools. So, we might need to do things like eminent domain sometimes to get the properties that we need to build the schools. But I think we really have to look at what is going to be best for our city in the future. And if we don't invest in our young people, if we don't invest in our children, what does that mean for our society? What does that mean for our workforce? What does that just mean for ensuring that every child has the same opportunity, has the same quality education, has an equitable education, has one that is really addressing who they are in a culturally competent way? I mean, we need to have that for the future of our cities. So I think education is highly, highly important and really needs to be prioritized.
All right, thank you. So one issue that sort of emerged this year with in terms of community boards, there were some appointments that weren't remade or redone, etc. How would you go about appointing board members?
That's a great question because, someone who was on my community board was not reappointed and she was an excellent community board member. Right now it is the council member and the borough president who work together, although it's sometimes hard to figure out who actually has the ultimate authority in making the appointment to appoint community board members. And I feel that, we need to make sure that community boards really reflect the community. And so sometimes we have community board members who have been on the board for years and years and years and years, and some of them maybe bring excellent expertise. But we also need to make sure that the demographics of the community board reflect the community. And so I was actually in favor of term limits, which was passed with the city charter vote. But we might want to think about how do people get on community boards? Are they all just appointed? Should they be elected? We certainly don't want to have expensive elections. That's not what I'm saying. But maybe we could look at that. Maybe we could like some kind of hybrid model where you're ensuring that people are able to run for for a community board appointment, because some people might be shut out of the process that way, but
Mm.
also where maybe there is some leeway for the council member to also appoint people, because not everybody can run for office, even if it's something as, hyper-local as a community board member, because they might be a working parent, because they just don't have the resources, because they don't have the, the political expertise or backing.
Mm.
So I think we need to look at the process, because I think more can be done to make our community boards more diverse. I was happy that we got 5 new members of Community Board 1 this past round, and they were all people of color, which I thought was terrific, because the year before we had 4 white men who were appointed. And so, I think local reporting really helped with that, because there was, the data was reported out across all the community boards. And I think that really kind of, put a spotlight on the fact that we need to make sure that there is diversity and inclusion and equity on our community boards. So for me, that's what I would, until the process kind of gets changed, I would really look at not just kind of picking the obvious people who should serve on a community board, but really looking at the makeup, really looking at gender, really looking at sexual orientation, really looking at, all those different groups that we want, that are in our community, that we want to see reflected on our community boards as well. Based on religion, ethnicity, all those kinds of things.
Right.
So
Wonderful.
that would guide me.
Okay. Another issue in Western Queens is transportation. Some people want less cars, more pedestrian, bicycle access, etc. What is your view on that in terms of, say, the movement toward alternative transportation as opposed to just the motor vehicle?
Well, we have to take our dependence off cars. It's critical because of climate change, because of health outcomes, pollution, all those kinds of things. And because, people are looking for other ways to kind of get around our city, whether it's by bike, whether you're a pedestrian, we need to improve our public transportation. So I feel that, we're in a city, right? So in a city, you should have excellent public transportation and also kind of complete streets where people share the road. And you're putting the focus on pedestrians and cyclists, and not just everything being about cars. So I do want to see more cars off the streets. I do have a car myself, which I use to go visit my parents and do also deliver groceries every week during COVID to families and all that. But I don't see it as taking precedence over or being, more important than pedestrians or people who want to bike. My family bikes. And so I really do feel like we need to really develop these alternative systems. And you go to other cities and you see these this amazing infrastructure that's been built. And it's like New York City can do that as well. There are cities that are older than New York City that have done it. And so we can certainly do it, and we need to do it. It's important for our climate. It's important for our health. It's important for people to be able to, exercise, or just people to not have to rely on a car, because that is not good. We need to get the cars off the road for sure.
Okay. Now, Evie, last question. Council member Costa Constantinides has done a lot of work on the environment. Many positive things, it's hard to argue otherwise. Is there anything that you would focus on, say, like environment, like he did, if you were to be the next council person?
Yeah, Costa has been a leader. He has really been a trailblazer in terms of pushing for legislation and policy on the city level regarding, climate change, climate justice, and the environment. And so certainly I would want to continue those efforts, because that issue has been very important to me, and also to the work of Global Kids. Our youth have been very, very involved, and they're very passionate about that issue. So I would want to continue that. I believe in the renewable Rikers proposal that he has submitted, and I think that that's worth seeing further developed and explored. For me personally, I feel like, particularly during COVID and being so involved in providing mutual aid and other forms of relief, that we really need to look at how we create communities of care. How do we support one another as neighbors? How do we make sure that everybody has access to health care? How do we make sure that everyone has access to food? How do we make sure that everyone has access to decent and affordable housing? So, everything is so interconnected, so it's very hard for me to say, and I need to learn to do this, like, here's my one issue, because I do feel that everything is interconnected, and that each issue is informed by the other. But I really do believe that, budget justice, legislative justice, housing justice, those are really, really key issues moving forward. And the work that I've started to do on the Housing Committee, and also just with organizing on the ground in the community around housing issues, looking at things like community land trusts as a way to promote affordable housing, looking at how we can allocate more funding to build supportive housing, looking at how we can kind of transition from a system that focuses on spending lots of money on shelters. How do we then shift that funding to provide more permanent housing for folks who are unhoused? I think that's really, really key. So I would say, if I had to pick one, I would say housing is really going to be an important issue for this district and for this city. And it is so tied to so many other outcomes for people, whether it's their health, whether it's their education, whether it's their social mobility, whether it's their just ability to live, a decent life and be in a safe community. So I think that would be something that I really want to focus on, is housing and alternative ways of developing affordable housing, and ensuring that it is truly affordable, and not just, something that's thrown in because a developer has to. We need to actually look at how do we, as a city, be more proactive in leading the charge for affordable housing in a meaningful way.
All right. Well, on that note, Evie, thank you very much for your time today.
Oh, thank you so much, Christian. I really enjoyed it, and I appreciate the opportunity.